Without further revelation, it is impossible to date the birth and crucifixion of Jesus Christ with any specificity. We can, however, place these events within a rudimentary chronology. It will be important in our discussion of the events of the sixth seal, not to mention the events of the seventh seal, to place them in a historical context as best we can. Understanding that there will be limitations and an inherent and unavoidable lack of clarity, it will still be instructive to reconstruct our history as it pertains to the aftermath of the crucifixion, the restoration of the gospel, and the opening of the seventh seal. The starting point for our chronology will be the birth of Jesus Christ. It will be our 0 point. We know that the crucifixion of Jesus Christ took place less than 1,000 years ago. We also know that his birth preceded his death by about 3 decades. With this in mind, we will use the year 11 AD as our 0 point, designating the theoretical birth of Jesus Christ. It is just under 1,000 years from our current year. From this point, we will place events along an approximate timeline. These events will not be all-inclusive, but will be those important to our future examination of the context of John's book of Revelation. Given that Jesus Christ is a 12th century figure, then the events of the New Testament, the book of Revelation excepting, also belong to the 12th century. In 1517, Martin Luther posted his famous 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church, setting off the Reformation. The implication here is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Meridian Day Saints initially grew, but by the early 16th century had fallen into total apostasy. In the middle of the 15th century in Venice, crystal glass was first developed. This establishes the earliest possible date for the writing of John's Revelation. Around the same time crystal glass was invented, Johannes Gutenberg introduced mechanical movable type printing to Europe, starting the printing revolution. This would eventually lead to mass printing of the Bible and John's Apocalypse. In 1546, the Council of Trent, in reaction to the Reformation, first set the canon of the Bible, among other things. John's Revelation was included, while Martin Luther rejected the book. The period from the crucifixion of Jesus Christ up to the 16th century was one of planetary disorder and catastrophe on Earth. The Black Death of the 14th century is but one example of the havoc and terror caused by the catastrophic interaction of the planets. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII approved a new calendar after the planets, including Earth, had settled in their final and stable orbits. John saw his vision and wrote it down within a fairly narrow window of opportunity given this new chronology. He did so in the due time of the Lord, a concept we will explore in further depth later in this series. But first, we must revisit the chronological setting of the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon has its own internal chronology, which is only natural since it records the histories of nations wholly separate from the rest of the world and its chronologies. For our purposes, we will only consider the 1,000-year history of the Nephites. The Nephites reckoned their chronology using 3 reference points. The first 0 point was the time that Lehi and his family left Jerusalem. When the Nephites changed their form of government from a rule of kings to a rule of judges, they began counting years from the beginning of that political reform. Lastly, when the sign of the birth of Jesus Christ was given, the Nephites began their yearly count from that time. Within these 3 chronological systems, the Nephites also counted the number of years in the reign of a king and the number of years served by a particular judge. Traditionally, the Church has linked the chronology of the Book of Mormon to the consensual chronology due to three events common to both: the birth of the Savior, his death, and the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah. This was the year that Lehi left Jerusalem. This means that, approximately speaking, Lehi left Jerusalem in 600 BC, Jesus Christ was born in 1 BC, and died in 33 AD. Of course, this is using the consensual chronology. The Anno Domini chronological timeline was added to the bottom of the Book of Mormon beginning with the 1920 edition. If we use our rudimentary chronology with a 0 point of 1100 AD, the Book of Mormon chronology looks much different. We know from the internal chronology of the Book of Mormon that the Nephite civilization lasted a little more than 1,000 years. There were 600 years between the departure of Lehi from Jerusalem and the sign of the birth of Jesus Christ. The last chronological entry in the Book of Mormon, made by Moroni just before sealing up the plates, states that more than 420 years had passed after the sign of the coming of Christ. This would place the close of the Book of Mormon in the 16th century, according to our revised chronology. The hypothetical date of the end of the Book of Mormon, 1521, places Moroni's hiding up the plates squarely in the middle of the Age of Discovery. It was a time of extensive exploration and colonization by the European powers. The timing of the hiding up of the plates and coming forth of the Book of Mormon was planned in advance. The Lord repeatedly assures those who had care of the records, including Enos and Mormon, that he would protect the records and bring them forth in his own due time. The Church loudly proclaims the coming forth of the Book of Mormon through Joseph Smith, and rightfully so. But the hiding of the record was as equally important as its coming forth. If it had not been hid up, the record would have been destroyed. There would have been nothing to bring forth. The preface to the Book of Mormon, written by Moroni, is clear on these points. It has been assumed that the hiding up of the plates afforded them protection against marauding Lamanites. This is certainly true. But just as important is the timing of their burial. The hiding of the plates immediately after the demise of the Nephite civilization, and shortly before the advent of the European powers into the area, afforded protection for the plates. After all, one of the primary objectives of this period was to seek out new sources of gold and other precious metals. The gold plates would be an obvious target due to their intrinsic value, not to mention their sacredness. Joseph Smith found this out for himself. Even Joseph was warned about using the plates for monetary gain. It is sufficient to say that it was wisdom to keep the plates in the ground as briefly as possible. The plates lay buried not for almost a millennium and a half, but only for 3 centuries, or even less. Certainly, the Lord had the power to protect the plates for as long as necessary. However, his due time included a very short duration between the exchange from Moroni to Joseph and then back again. The revelation of John, like the Book of Mormon, was reserved for our day to come forth to the house of Israel in the due time of the Lord. In the case of John's apocalypse, there were no plates to preserve. Instead, the Lord simply bided his time to give the vision to the apostle when external circumstances warranted it. Since John was a translated being, there was no need to hurry. The Lord could wait for centuries, which in fact he did. One of the reasons that the Lord delayed in bringing forth the book of Revelation is explained in the angel's instructions to Nephi. It was important that the record of John, among others yet to be revealed, should come forth in its purity. According to our revised chronology, the Lord waited to show John the vision for approximately 4 centuries, roughly from 1100 to 1500 AD. The Lord could have given the vision immediately in the 12th century, but this would have given 4 additional centuries for the text to be corrupted. We know that the great and abominable church corrupted the book which proceeded forth out of the mouth of a Jew, referring to the Bible. The text of the Bible was so corrupt that the Lord instructed Joseph to make a new revealed translation, restoring the original text. Joseph began the work only months after the organization of the church with the assistance of Sidney Rigdon. In spite of the delay, the text of the Revelation of John did have some textual corruptions, which Joseph corrected. If it hadn't been divinely planned, the timing of the revelation would appear extremely fortuitous. If we assume an approximate date of 1500 AD, 50 years after the introduction of crystal glass, then the revelation arrived just in time to benefit from the advent of mass printing. The revelation, like many volumes, could now be mass-produced, ensuring that it would survive and be read throughout Western Europe. It was also important for the book to appear before the convening of the Council of Trent in 1546. This allowed it to be included in the biblical canon.